Clea asked for a song, and I think that's a great idea to start it off with a song. This has never been a song before, but it should be a song, right? So, no judgments, no songsters in the room. I like the fragile things you give. It makes me want to walk a little softer. That's your song. Okay. What I thought I'd do, just because I know a fair amount of you, I thought I'd give a little bit of an idea of where sort of some of the ideas of specific works came from. I thought it was appropriate, since you're the privileged viewers of the day. If that bothers anybody, I'm sorry. I know people like everything to be magical and mysterious. But I always find that with my work, because it is sort of coming from someplace, it always matches up with someone else's story in a different place than it is my story. So it's never, as much as you might know the story, you don't really know my point of view. So this painting that's here that says "if," I've told the basic premise of the story a number of times to people here. I'll do a quick synopsis of it. My father is a sculptor, and before I was born, my brother was born 5 years before, and he needed to get a job. He needed to pay for his kids, and so he was applying for teaching jobs. He went to Stanford and then another school to get his graduate degree, and when he was trying to get his first teaching gig, one of the schools that he was in the running for a job was at the University of Hawaii. And he did not get that job. But if he would have gotten that job, I would have lived this life on the right-hand side of the painting. So the right-hand side of the painting is me, riding a surfboard, holding this perfect mountainscape and, surfing over a pile of volcanoes and beautiful people and cans of pineapple. And I tried to relate it to the naturalist John Muir, who's on the left. And in this book, The Story of My Boyhood and Youth, I don't know has anybody read this book? Anybody acknowledgement? It's really great. And I would say it's probably his best writing as his writing goes, because it's not as Victorian and sort of Bible-y, crunchy as some of the other stuff. It's very descriptive, but one of the passages in it talks about why they ended up where they did. And I'll just read it real quick. There were quite a large number of immigrants aboard. This is coming from Scotland on the boat. Many of them newly married couples, and the advantages of the different parts of the New World that they expected to settle in were often discussed. My father started with the intention of going up to the backwoods of Upper Canada. Before the end of the voyage, however, he was persuaded the states offered superior advantages, especially Wisconsin, Michigan, where the land was said to be as good as Canada and far more easily brought under cultivation. For in Canada, the woods were so close and had made a nightmare out of his life in getting a few clear trees and stumps. So he changed his mind, concluded to go to one of the western states, which was Wisconsin. And that's why he ended up in Wisconsin instead of Canada. But on this side, I said, what if he would have been an naturalist in Canada? And so I sat in front of the scene of Lake Louise, which is in Banff National Park, which I just visited this past summer and got to see the scene after I kind of painted it. And so it's kind of a what-if scenario. And to me, that sort of what-if narrative is really how kind of paintings work in my mind. When you're building sort of an image, you take an avenue, and then that avenue, asks for a certain response, and that response then asks you to respond to it in another way. And then by the time that you're done with it, you realize you've kind of taken this journey, this trip through a piece of work. And so I try to make work that maybe includes not just the end point, not just the destination, but sort of the whole trip there. So that is the nature of that one. Does anybody have any questions about that specific painting in general? I mean, it's also lots of motifs, classic motifs. The person in a canoe, which I call her Canoe Girl. And Canoe Girl I found in a pamphlet about this caverns, and these people in these caverns, like, were promoting you to go visit these caverns and had a map of the caverns. So it was probably the souvenir you'd pick up when you went to the caverns. And inside of it had these people, and all of them were women, and they were all sort of in these sort of moments of being dressed up, going in these caverns, and kind of being in it. I don't think people actually took canoes down into the caverns, but there was one where she's just canoeing around in the cavern. And to me, the idea of sort of how we have related to nature and how we've made these parks and how we've sort of made our experiences become something that's either imagined and lost, or that's integral to our personal experience, that we have to, if you go to this park, you have to do this, and then you have to do that, and then you have to do this. Well, then we're sort of prescribing this relationship to nature. And most of my work is sort of descriptive of how those prescriptions sort of fall apart. How we sort of, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the significance of the grid as sort of a reoccurring icon throughout your different works?
Yeah, the grid is kind of a new thing for me. I always kind of fought against modernity and sort of modern mark making. I always thought I was a little bit more of an old school painter. I always kind of wanted to be the Elmer Bischoff or some Bay Area figurative person or something like that. But I think I realized it was a way to kind of bust back into a more current kind of energy of the work. The work kind of finished itself. It unified these sort of moments that were less important and kind of just brought them all together. I remember being in a young artist being in a class, and I made this work, and it was a response to a James Ensor painting that the Berkeley Museum has. And it's this beautiful little seascape, and it's so Gaussian and gray and dark, and it's muddy, but it's not muddy at all. The colors, really, really nice. The color's really nice. And my response to it was to put a couple pieces of screen in front of an assemblage of stuff, and I liked how it neutralized everything. And so I realized lately that I really like to just put it into these sort of empty spaces as a way to re-inform the surface. Maybe the painting's not as important as I thought it was, or maybe as good as I thought it was. Somehow putting the black on it, or putting the black line on it, attempts to make it less important, that experience of trying to paint it, So.
It's interesting to hear that it comes from your earlier assemblage using the screen itself, and that the notion of the screen and looking through the window actually is really apropos to a lot of your subject matter, and kind of a way of, like you said, weaving together your viewpoint.
Sure. Yeah. Well, scenes through windows. That's one of my father's themes for his work, and I've definitely done a lot of window work and objects thinking about reflection. It's a real memory game, so it's a good read. Yeah, I like that. Thanks.
The burning log.
What's going on with the burning log? What is going on with that burning log? I have a fascination with floods. I grew up on a river outside of Cleveland, and there'd be these trees. At some point, all these willows grew up along this river banks in my hometown, and they grew right at my childhood. They grew to their sort of maximum life, like they'd sort of achieved their biggest size. And we had a couple of big storms. We always had big storms, but we had a big storm one year, and these willows started just falling into the river. and started floating down the river. And some of us that were old enough and brave enough swam out into the river and jumped on the floating logs and kind of rode them down like canoes down the river. And that image has always been sort of just like, phew, holy heck, that's crazy. Probably because I was much younger than, I got close, I swam out, but I don't think I even got onto one. And then just the sort of destruction of that. And so flames coming out of it while it's floating down the water. I mean, I think succumbing, sort of succumbing to the toil of nature, succumbing to life. Next, I was going to talk a little bit about just process. Somehow these images find, I'll pass around drawings. I make drawings, and while I'm making paintings, I don't kind of isolate the experience as an individual thing. I look at the paintings I'm making, and then I make drawings from the paintings while I'm working on them. And sometimes that's about a language too, building up a language that describes or brings something into a clear focus. And so this one, the language that went around this painting, I have the image of a hero. He got better, but we had to go out every weekend for 3 years. I have recreation or recreation. I have total world domination. I have one more. I have more than one. I have assignment. Total world domination is the American dream. And I have location. I love nature. That's why we are creating and supporting situations to conquer. The painting is really about this place in Ohio that's called the Zanesville Y Bridge. And you might ask why they make a bridge that way, which I think is a worthwhile question. I guess they had 3 parts of town that they really wanted to only make one bridge to connect. But on the bridge itself, there's stop lights, so you could get stopped on this bridge and wait for the people to go by you and stuff like that. And to me, it's always been this sort of, I only visited it once, but it's always sort of been this like dream space for me. This weird sort of human-made structure in the middle of a river. I think most of my favorite dreams are sort of that spot, a human-made object in nature. And so I thought about just populating it with people sort of appreciating a river landscape, sort of on their own merits, having their own kind of fun. So I've got these people that are inner tubing, including my ex-wife Kristen. She's standing on top of a tube. A group of people, canoe party going down, water skiing with someone in the back going up and someone watching. And then a nod to Mark Twain with Jim manning the raft down the river. So some people kind of call it a kitchen sink, I think, when a kitchen sink approach, when you just keep including more narratives into one narrative. But to me, it's that intersection where narratives overlap, which is what makes it, to me, sort of more vital or more contemporary landscape. I think to imagine that we could look at a landscape that was untouched by human hands, I think is a fallacy and sort of an improper thought, and probably a thought of John Muir and all his contemporaries, transcendentalists, trying to figure out a way to keep pristine landscape. I'm not saying that I'm encouraging people to destroy landscapes, but to me, I want to build up pictures that talk about these sort of intersections of people's beliefs and experiences. So I was going to mention, with that in mind, there's one painting on the other side that's So it has the name of the story in the painting, but I don't know if people know of the Firefall that used to happen in Yosemite. So I think the last kind of times that it was happening was in the 70s. It started by this guy James Macaulay, who I have a good friend named Macaulay, so I wonder if he's related. But it was called Firefall, and I'll just describe it, and that's the painting over there. Curry's aim was to provide for his guests a program of complete entertainment, which included such features as a heated swimming pool, dance pavilion, and the wonder of wonders, the Firefall. Originated by James Macaulay early in the 1870s, the Firefall consisted of a large fire built on Glacier Point, the embers of which were pushed over the edge of the point after dark. This produced a veritable fall of fires for hundreds of feet down the face of the cliff. Although the Firefall had been abandoned for years prior to Curry's arrival in the valley, with the sure instinct of a showman, he resurrected this spectacle and turned it into a nightly attraction, which over the years achieved immense visitor popularity. Every evening, Curry, who fancied himself the senator of Yosemite, boomed forth from his camp to the point above, triggering the majestic display of pyrotechnics with his awesome bellow, "Let the fire fall." So, yeah, I mean, it's humans' interaction with nature. That's, I think, I want to be realistic about it. So, any questions?
Any thoughts on this body of work?
Give it a moment.
You mentioned your father more than once. He's an artist, correct?
Yep.
And what kind of work does he do?
He's done a lot of figurative work. He just sent me a picture on the Facebook. He's an avid Facebook user. Promotes his works on Facebook a lot. Of a corgi with a smiling face. He's been doing a lot of ceramics lately. But when I was a kid, he would make clay originals, and then he would make a plaster cast of that. And then in the plaster cast, he'd pour fiberglass resin. So he'd pour in resin, and then he'd back that with the fiberglass mesh, and then pour more resin on top of it. And there were these beautiful, rendered images of Native Americans and a lot of naked women, cars. He likes cars. I think he's really wanted to be a car designer. That was a big part of his childhood. He was more the grease monkey, and I was more of the river boy. So, but I think our stories are pretty similar in like a poetic life force for art making, like things coming from poetry of life instead of having some agenda that isn't about being reflective. So.
Is that a big part of his? Has it always been a big part of his life?
Yeah. I mean, he's a working artist, but he was also a professor. He taught for 27 years, and he taught at a community college. And I think I grew to love his appreciation of how he'd have an 18-year-old student, stoned out of his mind, not really getting things done, next to like a retiree who was trying to make his life's work, And I think that sort of contradiction to me has always been very interesting in the art world when you're in this sort of world of making. Even if you're sort of more established and you know how you make things, you're around people who are still finding things, still new to methodologies, or also trying to change what they've established, or vice versa, just having a good time. So I'm trying to have more of a good time. I'm trying not to put as much pressure on the objects and let them be a little bit more about the joy of making and finding meaning.
I think that's what resonates with people like myself. You can tell you're having fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's John Muir spitting out water into Teddy Roosevelt's ear, and then that water is pouring then out of his mouth, which I don't know if Yeah, have you seen that if you watch that Ken Burns documentary, they pushed a lot of that relationship between the two. Like he took him on a camping sojourn up in the mountains there. That's the two of them. Okay, and they got back to nature, and then all of a sudden Yosemite, was heralded as being a much more important object.
And they brought the cooler with them.
Yeah, the cooler. Yeah.
Well, that.
Yeah. Well, probably a little whiskey, probably a little Scotch whiskey or something like that. I don't know. I mean, he might have been a teetotaler. I could see him being someone that started as something and became something else later in life. He seems to be conflicts unresolved in his identity to me.
Sure.
So.
It looks like you had fun with that.
Yes.
And there's the joy of whittling kind of happening there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like maybe you're sitting on your back porch. He
It's
actually has a studio with a porch.
I do have a studio with a porch,
Back porch.
and I wish my house had a porch. I really like porches. I think we should make more art on porches. We went to school at CCAC when it had the C at the end, and a few of its buildings had porches. And also, there was where outside of the print studio, there was this really great environment with the picnic tables where you could sit at picnic tables and talk. So picnic tables and furniture of the park and are really important to me as identities of meeting places. Like how we coexist. Yeah, most people don't take a cooler for themselves. They're taking a cooler for a gathering, for a group. That's important to me. So.
What role does the cooler play there?
Preserver of weirdness. I don't know, well, it's enough to contain the water for a certain period of time. We'll use the bad 80s term vessel. I think that term has fallen out of favor, but it still is a vessel. It's a container for holding the moment.
It is like an analog for your picnic table.
Yeah, no,
It's a social moment, something to gather around.
Absolutely.
And a medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No.
What's the stuff above? What's on the dude's head?
What's on the dude's head? Well, he's got a tree on his head, for one thing, because he's a tree head. John Muir's. Do you guys know this? John Muir's a tree head. Yeah. The guy liked trees. He was into trees. So he's got a tree on the top of his hat, which is a little nod to my teacher in Iowa, this guy David Dunlap, who is a really awesome maker, and he activates his clothing, like he paints on his clothes and stuff. And he has this one hat that he let me alter once, and on the top of it, inside, it's like this really nice sort of Stetson type hat, and that sort of valley that it happens in the top of the hat. I put in a little story of I made a little wooden dam on one end, so I made a reservoir out of the top, and then shared a story with him when I was 7 and we were taking a family trip out west, out here to California. We were stopped in Colorado one night, and we stopped above our campground to check out this kind of alpine scene, and a huge rainstorm started happening, and my dad was he was heating up the Dinty Moore beef stew, in the can. And so it was kind of lukewarm, and we're all sitting around kind of in the van. We always had vans. We're eating this Dinty Moore beef stew and having a good time. And we ended up just staying there. We're like, okay, we're not going to go set up camp down at the bottom of the hill. And lo and behold, when we went down the next day, the campground had got washed out. And actually, people had died in the campground. They had drowned in the campground. So we could have died in the campground. Yep. So now it's sort of my first incidence of like this sort of haunting could have happened, kind of like the stories of what could have happened. Thanks, Dinty Moore. Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of cans of that in my survival kit for when the apocalypse happens. And then the knife is this Ha Ha La's knife. I have an alter ego who's a musician, and he has a knife that he fashioned out of a chunk of cedar. And then the stick is a whittle on a stick, which the way I like to whittle on sticks sometimes is to kind of play off the totem pole rationale of stories, narratives that are combined into one stick. So like you go from one scene to the next. And so that has like a little boy at the bottom, and it has an owl and a pig's leg and pig face and a texture. I don't know. It's like, kind of, yeah, kitchen sink. It's kitchen sink. The kitchen sink can also be more than just a painting. It can be objects, collected objects, which painting back in the back corner that has objects on a shelf that all kind of relate to the genesis of the painting itself. Or
where you went off the painting with the grid on the wall?
yes, yeah.
What's the title of that piece?
I forget. The number 5, everywhere we go, there we are. So, and that one, I brought in a couple examples of sort of the genesis of working on those images. So these are the figures, the pre-drawings of the figures that I put in those, and then this was sort of this landscape, an interpretation of the landscape that I kind of did. Yeah. So that's that. The other painting that's around the corner there is the scene of these people on a boat that sort of has a car in the middle, and that's from this Cuba story that I read about in newspaper in like 2003. I saw this image of these people that were escaping from Cuba, and there was some guy that was living in Cuba that was making cars into boats. Like he was putting a front and a back on the car and then sealing it up. But what was kind of ingenious about what he was doing is he was actually bringing the steering wheel through the top, so you could sit. The driver would be actually sitting on the top of the car, so they would be driving. But there was people in the car too, if I remember seeing the picture correctly. So it's a little bit about this sort of escaping into nature, away from something, but to something else. So, and that one has a head that's very much a nod to my father's work, some of his figurative work he did, that you can flip around, you can change and alter it. So, playful.
Nice. And you made all the frames yourself?
I made all these frames. Yeah, these are. And the wood was, it's all salvaged wood. I mostly don't work on surfaces that I make. Most of the surfaces, even the stretcher bars, I try to get them to kind of come to me somehow, like they sort of arrive to my life, and then that I have to live within these constraints that someone else has sort of chosen. And then I work from that. And then panels, a lot of the panels, the panel that it has the grid on it, that one was a next door advertisement. Someone was giving away their paintings and undone paintings, and so I had to scrape off. Sometimes it's more work using someone else's surface than making the surface yourself, but I had to scrape off some shinko, some like paper that she had glued onto it or something like that. And I think her name is still on the back of the work. So if I don't put my name on it, maybe she'll get the sort of credit for it later on, which would be great. Yeah. So.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a question, and
Yeah.
that is that you mentioned CCAC.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you have an art background, but
Yeah.
I don't see any contemporary influences, particularly of other artists. I mean, if anything, it seems like your work talks a little bit more about outsider art. But
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious about who your influences are, and what teachers you work with.
Well, at CCAC, I worked with Franklin Williams. So painting-wise, I worked with Franklin Williams and Raymond Saunders. And I did a lot of sculptural work, too. I worked with Dennis Leone and Linda Fleming, who taught me a lot about nature and landscape. Both of them were wellsprings for, Linda really got me into Buckminster Fuller. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books, operating manuals for Spaceship Earth, all this kind of stuff. But printmaking was probably the room that I fell in love with art at that school, at CCAC, and that was with Jack Ford and Charlie Gill. And Jack Ford and I are still really good friends. And I really loved his perspective on art and his experience, like that it wasn't just about sort of making it in the art world, it was about making good art. And so, I mean, contemporarily, I mean, I see myself all the time in people's work, in interests, but I would say most people that I see who make work that has reference that I like to link to, they've simplified it more than I have. I still feel like maybe more like the outsider artist, I'm more attracted to the idea that I want my ideas to coexist with something that has already kind of gone before it, instead of being brave and breaking out on your own and being sort of individual. To me, I want that history to be a part of what I present. So, and I think that's a lot of outsider artists have that, sort of dilemma, if it's biblical, if it's like a passage from the Bible or from what they do in community, like maybe they're a pastor and they talk about sort of the power of being united as a group or something like that. To me, those influences are sort of more passionate than the idea of an artist's identity being the ending point. To me, that's where I start.
I think another thing that is similar to that, I thought the same thing, it reminded me of Howard Finster. It's vision oriented or dream oriented.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am from a hometown with a famous outsider artist, and his name is Henry Church, and he was an untrained artist. But by the time he was dead, he kind of gained in popularity. He went to Europe and saw the European, came back and made paintings and stuff like that. So, but he famously made this piece of artwork in my hometown, which is a boulder. There's this huge boulder. It's 40-foot long sandstone boulder right on the river, and he tried to carve it under the guise of being it being unknown to people. And so he tried to carve in this image of the sort of disappearing history of Native Americans, and he called it The Rape of the Indian Nation, and he titled it. And he was trying to carve it like it had been left by them, though it was totally carved by his hand. And he was carving on it one day, I guess, pretty far along, and this guy from the town found him there at this rock and went back to, he was fishing in the river, it's a kind of a trout river. He went back to town and said, "Old man Church is carving into a boulder by the river. What the heck?" And so it became this sort of, got taken over and by the town itself. Instead of it being sort of this kind of sneaky, I'm going to try to leave this sort of hidden piece of artwork, it got taken over. And so he carved like an image of the new Capitol building on the outside. And, it kind of became a little bit more of a Barnum and Bailey kind of weird object. It has all these extra stories that it didn't originally have on it. And he, for a while, also had made these paintings, and his paintings were pretty bad. Like he was definitely a better stone sculptor than he was a painter. But he made these paintings, and he had a tent at the local fairgrounds. There was a fairgrounds called Geauga Lake, and he had a tent, and he had his paintings up in this tent. And so you could go and pay a quarter, and you could go look at his paintings. Like you could go pay to look at Church's big Niagara Falls or something like that. So I think to me that disjuncture between seeing a trained artist and an untrained artist, I mean, maybe that goes a little bit back to my father having that sort of, his classroom being this sort of naive and experienced kind of mix, that I always thought that having both of them was so much better. Having that both those realities in a scene spoke a little bit more of a truer sense of humanity than just sort of, oh, I made this awesome piece of art when I was 20 years old. I'd go into my friend's house and see my painting, and I'm like, from when I was 20, and you're like, well, that's a pretty good painting. Damn. And then you get to be 40 years old or 45 years old and get to make another painting. Hopefully you walk in and you look at that painting and you have a similar feeling of accomplishment. To me, that's more important than kind of like identifying the work. You know what I'm saying? Like it's more pride than competition. So.
Nathaniel does a lot of interactive pieces as well. The picnic bench piece. Would you like to tell us
Sure.
about
Well, I did just do a piece that I would definitely call one of my best pieces of art I've ever made. I got the chance to have a picnic table and at a Progressive Insurance. Everybody knows this corporation. Progressive Insurance has a very large art collection. They use the art collection in educational means and as more than just decoration in their corporate settings. They use it as a way to communicate and help bolster a richer community, which, I mean, I don't know any artist that would go like, oh, that's a stupid idea, and I don't believe in that at all. So I was like, excellent. And so they bought some of my, a few, like 6 paintings, small paintings from a show I had in the city. And I also had this picnic table that my friend Jason actually painted on this book that someone had carved into the seat. So I had this project where I have a picnic table and you can sit and carve into the table, and we use it as a conversation place. So they bought this idea as a community service project, and so for a month I was in Scituate on their campus, sitting with people that would come and visit with me, and we'd carve into the table, and then I'd spray paint their carvings, finish their carvings. They'd start them because they had basically about an hour. They'd carve into them, and then I'd carve them deeper and kind of communicate with their communication. Kind of elaborate on what they were trying to get at. And then I'd spray paint it, and then when I was done with the sort of creation of the carvings, I sealed it, and then I inked the whole thing up with relief ink, and then I printed the whole table as a woodcut. And so there's a 9-foot woodcut. What was nice, like when I usually do it with like tables I just buy from Home Depot. You buy a $100 table from Home Depot and you sit with people and make art, which Ma can remember from our time at Headlands, which was where I started this idea in 2006. And I printed it, and it really is an interesting object. I'm really happy with how those two objects, how the object made another object, which to me, I do that in my own practice of making paintings. I'll make something, and then that thing will make me make another thing. Like I'm working on this, it will make me make a drawing. To me, I like the idea of that art is making you make more art. It's sort of, unless it doesn't work out, then it's really like, your art is beating you up again. It could be, but I don't have that experience.
I love how you work in lots of different.
Yeah.
For your residency show, you had some beautiful etchings you did. You got wood carving.
Yeah, I'm a jack of all trades, for sure. Yep. Don't forget, I sang a song at the beginning, too. Singer.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah.
You were at University of Iowa for your...
Yeah, that's where I did my graduate work.
Were you doing painting or printmaking?
Painting, and I did printmaking. I worked with Keith Acapulco, who was he was the print teacher there. He was one of Lazansky's offsprings.
I was wondering, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
So I worked with Keith, but I worked mostly with this guy, David Dunlap, he was a multimedia artist, still is. He's no longer teaching there. He's retired. But yeah, I really liked that environment. That was, I was living here. My car was getting broken into, like all of us urbanites can experience.
You were living here and going there?
I was living here, and I was like, I am done with California. California is kicking my ass. It was 95, 96, so right before the bubble sort of started to burst on the first wave of money. So, and I had enough friends that were making good dough selling their art here, and probably should have stuck around. But I left, and then I went back to my hometown of Cleveland to teach, because there's a ton of universities there. I was like, I'll teach. And so I taught at the Cleveland Institute of Art for years, and among other places. I taught at the college that my dad taught at. I taught at Ursuline College. And I love teaching. Teaching's really great. I miss it.
There's a lot of opportunities back there.
Yeah, and it's a great town. The artists of Cleveland I would respect them over many people that I know. in other parts of the world. Yeah, I think they're just as talented as anybody else. Yeah.
Can you please talk about that piece over there?
The one on the bottom or the one on the top? The bottom. Okay, so bottom was getting to visualize this sculpture that I've always wanted to make, which is a stack of tables. I call it season over. Is the concept is that you're putting all the tables together so that the people can watch over them, or so they don't get sort of degraded over the winter or something like that. But I just thought it was an interesting arrangement of this item that I love to work with, which is the picnic table. And then I just made it into more of a natural scene with, it being by a lake, being a recreational setting, and all these spots where the grill used to be, the grill, so you can grill your wieners while you're like having your picnic. That's still located where it is, even though the picnic table's been pulled away.
Which leg is that?
It's imaginary lake. Yeah.
It's a beautiful photos, so.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I love color, and I'm not afraid of having the full range. I'm not a.
That caught my attention.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that might throw me a little away from contemporary painters and contemporary artists. I think a lot of contemporary artists that use paint tend to develop a family of colors, and then they make a picture in that family of colors. And to me, I don't want to. I want to have the full set of crayons. I don't want the 3 crayons and make everything with those 3 crayons, even though it's beautiful.
The tables there in the middle look like a nice structure there. Really.
Thanks. Well, yeah, my father is a structuralist. His drawing is he draws things very dynamically, and so I've always liked that, to being able to do that.
Well, you've always had your look.
He's,
So you've had a look
yeah,
ever since you were little.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's a Nat Parsons.
That's right. Well, I hope that's true. I hope that there's a familiarity and I don't want to avoid myself. I'm hoping that I'm confronting myself. I'm not trying to make the newest work. I'm just trying to make good work, and work that I can believe in. So.
Well, from my point of view, that question of whether he's a contemporary artist or whether the look of your work having folkish aspects is not at all contrived. There's nothing contrived about it.
Yeah.
It's a direct reflection of you and your soul. And to me, it's like you're a distinctly contemporary artist, in part just because there's nobody else's work that looks like yours.
Mm-hmm.
Your work is so distinct and so distinctly you, and the distance between your relationship to it is so complex. It's just an extension of your own body and mind and heart, and to the degree where you have you operate in these multiple fields simultaneously, and it just permeates your life on so many different levels all at the same time. And I think, knowing you for the past 25 years,
That's all right. It's good. It's an accomplishment.
I know my experience. I feel like my experience has some parallel. We were in the same place as these young paintery, printmakery types.
Yeah.
That age ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like we both were turning away. That was the point where people were turning away from modernity or postmodernism,
Mm-hmm.
just saying that they wanted something else, and a lot of what drove, it seemed like a lot of us, was just our childhood experiences,
Yeah.
which could include subcultures and nature and whatever
Mhm.
else, these
Mhm.
personal stories.
Yeah.
But I would like to also add that, while you develop this really deeply personal iconography, there's a lot of universal symbolism, I feel, that's built into the layers of what you're doing. For example, the picnic table has a personal and artistic and sort of philosophical meaning to you.
Yeah.
The way that you've assembled them here is sort of a pyramid. The meeting place, sort of the nexus of human connection.
Yeah.
It's a form, that has that recreated, the mundane sort of thing elevated to that kind of level. And I also find that your use of sort of gilded materials on the found stuff also does that. It sort
Yeah.
of elevates, it brings to the fore these everyday experiences that any of us and all of us have, and just take notice of that and the quality of those experiences. And that's universal.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Glad to see the
Too.
picnic bench here realized.
Yeah, that one. Well, the one that's I felt like I've almost applied for it. Like applying for residencies. Like, oh, that's a dreamy project. And then you're like, okay, so what would it be like when that first 6-year-old, who actually is pretty tall, climbs up that whole thing and falls right off and breaks his neck? So, want to be that artist? Want to be that guy? I mean, that's the nice thing about paintings. You can, or imagery that is, alludes to something. You can play around with stuff that is totally real and unreal at the same time. I mean, yeah.
Parents would have taught him to not touch the art.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is this a monument?
Is it a monument to? Yeah, it's a monument to a season, I think, is what I kind of call it. To me, like the amount of maintenance and work it takes for people to make things accessible to people. That to me is what it's about. Is the important thing. Maybe that's right now what's important, but that's what kind of, the kind of forgotten person that's just always picking up other people's trash or,
Well, and they're not being used. The picnic tables.
Yeah.
And the trees are brown.
The trees are brown. They're not.
So it's a little.
Yeah.
It's a little sad.
It's a little sad. Well, I've been accused of being a little sad. It's yeah. And when I was doing that picnic table, I was talking to these people about just how important I thought us sitting together was, and I got weepy more than once. I was just like, God darn it! Is this like? Why do I have to be a sensitive artist? It's like, dang it. But.
So what's going on in the one above it?
So that's like our original. That's pretty older work. Let's see. It's probably like it's been a while since I made that one. And to me, that was this concept I was building, which was the idea of you go to nature to prepare yourself to go have an experience with your book, to read your book in nature or something like that. And do you sit like at the picnic table that's prepared for you, or do you bring a blanket, or do you prepare for yourself? Take a blanket and sit in nature. And to me, it's that sort of choices that we all kind of make for ourselves to experience things. You put images in your mind of, what kind of gear people have to go back and backpacking way out in the wilderness or something like that, compared to just car camping. Because like when I was car camping as a kid, we would go in the van. My mom would take the wicker furniture out of the house, put it into the van, and we'd go and get a site pretty close to the lake, and we would just set up and around a fire pit and have this experience sitting in our furniture. So I guess my parents have fetishized furniture for me. So now I'm a picnic table guy.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Thank you.